In each of these passages, it is clear that the church gathered in each other's homes. Why is it that we will never read in the Bible of churches gathering money for a building fund for some church building project? Because it is contrary to the church that Christ is building. I know there are those who justify the little man-made kingdoms by the following passages. Acts chapter 2 verse 46, so continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. Acts chapter 3 verse 1, now Peter and John went up together to the temple at the hour of prayer, the 9th hour. Acts chapter 5 verse 19 right up to verse 21. But at night an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out and said, Go stand at the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. And when they heard that, they entered the temple early in the morning and taught. But the high priest and those with him came and called the council together with all the elders of the children of Israel and sent to the prison to have them brought. I am, however, dumbstruck by the poor exegesis of those who have so many impressive theological degrees and yet are not able to rightly interpret these simple passages of Scripture. Or might it be that they are deliberately twisting the meaning of these passages to hold on to a man-made kingdom? Okay, let us ask ourselves a couple of straightforward questions in order to rightly interpret these passages. Which Christians were in one accord in the temple? It was the Jewish Christians. From what nationality were the apostles when they went to the temple to pray? They were Jews. To whom did the apostles preach at the temple? A. To the church. B. To the Gentile Christians. Or C. To the non-Christian Jews. Remember, as Jews, the Jewish Christians went to the temple to be a testimony to the other Jews following God's commandment in the Old Testament. But as Christians, they came together from home to home. The Jewish Christians only went to the temple for their countrymen's sake and not because it was a Christian practice. Do we find any example of Christians, whether Jews or Gentiles, having their own church buildings or any other so-called place of worship? Of course not, because the Christians knew that if they built a place of worship, it would transgress God's commandment, both from the Old Testament as well as from the New Testament. This coming together in each other's homes was not only done in order not to transgress God's commandments, but has an aspect to church that has almost completely disappeared in the mainstream church today. Yet it was of utmost importance to the very nature of true biblical church. What is really disturbing, though, is that so many Christians who have been in the faith for such a long time don't understand the difference between a temple and a church. Why do pastors keep the flock so ignorant? The temple of God refers to the house or dwelling of God. As we have seen now, we as Christians are the living stones that make up the spiritual house or temple of God. The church, on the other hand, does not refer to a building but a particular type of assembly. There are Christians that know that the church refers to an assembly of believers and not a building, but then get a difference between a synagogue and a church confused. Now, it is true that both a synagogue and a church refers to a type of assembly, but they are quite different in nature in biblical terms. Let me try and explain this by explaining some Greek words for an assembly. The word synagogue comes from the Greek word synagogue, which entails an assembly of people brought together from those who were scattered. After the Temple of Solomon was destroyed and the Jews were scattered among all the nations, the Jews came together in small groups where they continued being taught by the law of Moses and the instructions of the prophets. The synagogue gathering helped them not to forsake their heritage as a nation, even though they were scattered all over the world without a temple. To the Jews, the synagogue was a religious school, similar to a Bible college of today. The word synagogue was sometimes used when it refers to the bringing the church together. Yet the word synagogue never referred to an actual church gathering. In other words, synagogue was never used to mean church, but only that the church was brought together. There are other Greek words that also refers to an assembly but are not commonly known. For instance, the Greek word pletos, which refers to a general gathering of people for no particular reason or purpose as such. It just refers to a common gathering of people. The other Greek word is panegyrous. This word is more interesting than pleitos in that it was used to describe an assembly that was spectator-orientated in nature. The word was used to describe the Greek Olympics gathering or religious gatherings. It was used to indicate religious gatherings because most of the people who gathered were spectator to the ritual performance of the priest up front. They might participate in prayer or bring something forward to sacrifice, but for the majority of the time they were spectators to a religious show. You would think that looking at today's church, that the church came from this Greek word panegyrus. I mean, if we go into most so-called church gatherings today, we enter a spectator-oriented religious show, where we hardly participate except for maybe singing songs and giving money. Unfortunately, neither of the Greek words panegyrus or pleitos was ever used to refer to mean church in the Bible. At last, we have come and look at the actual Greek word for church, which is ekklesia. It is a combination of two words, ek, which means out of, and klesia, which means called. Literally, it can be translated as called out. Yet the word ecclesia meant much more than assembly of the elect of Christ. The word ecclesia actually indicated a judicial meeting. Both the Greeks and the Romans used the Greek word ecclesia to refer to a meeting where people were called out to discuss and make decisions concerning the affairs of the state. The judicial meetings were attended for the stability of the state and advancement of the current kingdom. What is really interesting was that the word ecclesia was never used by the Greeks or by the Romans to indicate a religious gathering. Would you be surprised to find out that not even the Bible used the word ecclesia to mean a religious meeting? To demonstrate this, let me read to you an incident found in Acts chapter 19. I'll read from verse 24 right up to verse 31. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but throughout almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into dispute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised, and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now, when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theatre with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travelling companions. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theatre. Okay, before I read on, let us just look at what we know so far from this passage. Demetrius was offended by these new beliefs Paul brought to Asia, and the financial implication it had on his and others with similar trade did not have either. Demetrius got a whole mob together at the theatre to make a decision what they were going to do about this. Is there any indication that this was going to be a worship service? No, it leans more to a judicial state meeting, not so? Now, let us read from Acts chapter 19, verse 32. This time I'm also going to use some Greek words in the passage. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly, which is the Greek word ekklesia, was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Verse 33. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make a defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here, who are neither robbers of the temple nor blasphemers of your goddess.